Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of 2 Minutes to Review. It's Matt.
And it's Zach.
Our review show. We've been doing a lot of new albums. You click the picture. This is probably one of the biggest releases of this year. Iron Maiden coming back with a brand new one, their 17th album. This is Senjutsu.
Iron Maiden in general, it's always an event whenever they come out with a new album. And they're typically one of the few bands that, I mean, not to say that every new song that they release is great, but they typically don't disappoint. It's very rare to have a band that you can just, everyone agrees they are royalty. They are legends. I think it's
the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
in the defense of the Hall of Fame, though, even we said, maybe Iron Maiden doesn't need to be inducted right away before some other bands. But really, there's no denying how influential Iron Maiden is. We love them so much. We've even gone hours discussing incarnations of Eddie. I mean, if you haven't checked out if you have to pick the episode about the beloved mascot, go ahead and listen to that as well. I mean, we love Iron Maiden. Everyone loves Iron Maiden. We were so excited to get a chance to listen to this album, Senjutsu. Side fun fact, I actually got to join in and listen to Eddie Trunk taping an interview with Bruce Dickinson for Sirius XM. And the first question Eddie asked was, so how do you pronounce the album? We're having a debate. Is it Senjutsu? And I kid you not, Bruce said, tomato. So, so before anyone goes, Zach, you're pronouncing the name wrong. I don't think they care. I don't think Bruce cares.
And according to Google Translate, Senjutsu means tactics.
Yes, it's a tactical album.
The more you know.
Boom, 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 boom. And what's interesting about this album is that it's the longest wait we've had to have for a Maiden record. And it's not because they didn't want to release it sooner. I don't know if you heard about this, Matt, but there's a pandemic going on. But actually, they recorded this album and they finished it in 2019. And just as they were about to get ready to release music, everything shut down. They've had this album in a vault, locked up. And even band members haven't had the album during this whole 2-year period, or almost 2-year period. So here we are. We finally get new, exciting Iron Maiden music. Before we go into sharing our thoughts, I would like to give a very, very special shout out to one of our new sponsors, Rootless Coffee Co. They produce small batches of coffee out of Flint, Michigan. They consider themselves a subculture gateway to craft coffee, and it's really a great description of them. Matt and I love coffee so much. I mean, our lives run around it. And what's cool is that not only do they produce great tasting coffee, but they also work with a lot of different brands, musicians, artists, nonprofits to produce their own brands of coffee. So, you're kind of giving back to some of the, artists and creatives, and also producing some really tasty coffee. And if you head over to rootlesscoffee.com, use the code EPICROAST, and you'll receive 15% off of your order. That's right. Epic Roast, all caps. And you'll get 15% off. You can't beat that deal, Matt.
I mean, this is some really tasty coffee, too. And I'm not one to be like a coffee snob and go like, oh, well, this is the smallest batch roast I could find, so it's exclusive coffee and blah. No, I drink coffee. I drink what I like. And I haven't been actually this excited about a cup of coffee in a long time. It tastes really good. And I've tried their mainline one, a damn fine cup of coffee is what they call it. It is really tasty. So if you're trying to get into that small batch coffee, try these guys out. Rootless Coffee, Epic Roast at checkout. Get 15% off. I mean, you can't go wrong with that. It's some really good coffee at a lesser price. Everybody wins here.
All right. Matt, are you ready? Now, I think actually something we need to mention, this is actually their second double album.
Yeah, and I was kind of surprised when you sent me over the artwork for this one. I saw 3 vinyls on there. I'm like, 3 vinyls, really?
Yeah. Well,
then I cracked open the track listing, and oh man, I'll get into it in my review.
Well, I was gonna say, Matt, would you like to go first?
Sure, I will go.
See, I could be a gentleman sometimes. Ready?
Let's do it.
3, 2 minutes to midnight. Go.
So I'm going to lead off by saying that the Book of Souls, the last album, wasn't really my cup of tea. However, this time around, Senjutsu really hits the mark on almost every single level for me. The opening track, the title track, Senjutsu, really it's kind of boring to me. I mean, they start to hit their stride with Stratego, and then Writing on the Wall, the first single that they released, that is where you start to really see this album start to unfold. Really, I'm going to say it this way. The only thing that really disappointed me about this album was the artwork for Writing on the Wall, because everything else is very Japanese and Eastern inspired, and that was a guy on a motorcycle on top of a cliff. I'm going to say that. But moving on into what I would consider to be the finest 14 minutes of Iron Maiden that I've heard in a very long time is The Time Machine and Darkest Hour, and I think they really missed a big chance to release a killer track. Instead of Stratego, they should have put out The Time Machine as the second single. And just going deeper and deeper into this album, I mean, Iron Maiden, for them being as far into the game as they are, and they could have just phoned it in, they really didn't. And this time through the production and just remembering why you love Iron Maiden so much, getting deeper into the album from Lost in a Lost World onward in this album, it really shows you that Iron Maiden still has that capability to be that 80s Iron Maiden that we all know and love. And they are not trying to reinvent the wheel on this one, but they're trying to get everybody, in my opinion, to remember why you love Iron Maiden as much as you do.
Time's locked in. Out of 5 stars, what would you rank this album?
Let's see. Well, I'm going to go with 4 stars.
Wow.
Yep. There is a
ace is high from you.
Yes. You're so happy that you're getting all these puns in now.
You have no idea, Matt, how happy I am.
So the few things that I think are a misfire, the one I mentioned was the single artwork. I mean, and for Iron Maiden, they always do really interesting single artwork for, what was it again? The Writing on the Wall, where the guy is sitting on the cliff with the motorcycle. And that, they put that out after they released the album artwork for Senjutsu, where they showed Eddie with the helmet and the samurai sword, just looking like a badass samurai. And then they put that cartoon looking thing out.
I gotta say, at first, my first inclination is to say, well, Matt, we're reviewing the music, not the artwork. But we've talked about this in that Pick 3 episode about Eddie. The artwork with Iron Maiden is just as important with the music, for better or worse. I mean, they are, Eddie is such an iconic part of Iron Maiden. So I think it's absolutely fair to talk about the artwork too. And
then with Stratego, they did it right with showing him in another way with the samurai helmet and his head on the red cover. But I don't know, that Writing on the Wall one just kind of was bad to me. I mean, I really was digging the artwork, and I think every review that I've ever seen on the artwork for this album, everybody loved it. So good on them for doing the artwork the way that they did. I wish
real quick before you get more into the music, and then I want to go too because I'm getting anxious here. 5 stars out of 5 stars. How would you rank the official album artwork?
I'll give it 5 Eddie heads.
Ooh,
yeah. I mean, it's only proper. If you really get into the artwork, like if you zoom in on like the high res image, the work that they did on the blade, on the helmet, it's very intricate for an album cover, and they always put in a lot of effort onto their covers. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't surprise me that they really went all out, considering that the Book of Souls album, Eddie, was one of the worst ones in my opinion, because it just was Eddie's face, for better or worse, with some war paint on it. I
can go into a whole conversation about that, but that's not the point of this episode.
Right. So anyway, moving on.
Yeah, last thoughts about the music, and then I'm going to go into it, and then we'll probably delve into it again.
Yeah, I mean, music-wise, a couple of things that really just didn't strike me as right with this thing was early on in the album, it seems like if you took like a note card and put it in front of your speaker, like it's just something's not filtered right. And then Bruce Dickinson's vocals on Stratego, and not one of my favorite songs on the album, but his vocals on there just bother me for some reason, and the production on it just doesn't seem right. It really feels like I mentioned, that Writing on the Wall starts to really unfold the album for what it's going to be going forward. So for me, I mean, those are very minor missteps. for me to come out and say after the last album that I enjoyed this for everything that I loved about Iron Maiden in like the 80s and the early 90s and going on into, some lesser famous albums in like the 2000s, for them to really remind me of why I love them on this album just speaks volumes, because I'm admittedly not the hugest Iron Maiden fan. When they miss really hard in my book, but when they're on, I love it. So I love it. And hell yeah, four stars, 4 Eddie heads, whatever you want to give it.
High praise, but now it's my turn. So count me down.
All right.
I'm anxious. I got thoughts.
10, 9,
Jerk.
8, 2, 1, go.
Okay, so the good news. Senjutsu is far more enjoyable than Book of Souls, and it has a lot more successes to it. But it still sadly features a lot of the same points of frustrations that I had with Book of Souls. Namely, I hate to say it, but it didn't have to be a double album. There's just a lot of fluff and excessive repetitiveness heard throughout. I think songs like Stratego, The Parchment, and Hell on Earth really suffer the most from it. I mean, these songs could literally be cut in half and sound even better, and maybe even become like classic Maiden songs. I mean, especially The Parchment. I mean, that could have easily been a 5-minute song instead of being dragged out to 12 minutes. It's just cool riffs, but I didn't need to hear it over and over again within a span of 12 minutes. And then you got songs like Lost in a World. I mean, first off, terrible production on that song. I don't know what happened with the vocal reverb there, but it sounds horrendous. But then it just drags on with unnecessary fillers. I mean, that first 2 minutes could have been its own separate intro track. It didn't need to be one. And that was a problem that happened on the Final Frontier a lot too. With that said, there's songs like Death of the Celts and The Time Machine that are among the exceptions. I mean, yeah, they're a little bit on the long side, but there's a lot of meat on there that kept me excited. And then I think, and this is kind of telling, in that the standout track for me was actually the song that was the shortest on the album. It's Days of Future Past. To me, it proves that Maiden can still prove how great they are, even in modern era, within 4 minutes. I mean, it has everything you love about them within that short time frame. I mean, overall, it's a good album, but it's a frustrating one, because I know Maiden is capable of still producing a flawless, stellar album, but the problem is that there's no one behind the board telling Maiden, hey, snap out of it. You got to focus. No. Don't add an extra solo. Stop over fluffing the songs. No offense to Kevin Shirley, but this album, despite having some strengths to it that they've been lacking with the last album, it just really proves that they desperately need someone in the studio who's actually willing to stand up to Steve Harris and go, no, do this instead.
All right, and we have a time. Out of 5, what would you rank it?
3
Okay.
Eddies. Listen, there's some really fun moments on there. I go back to the word frustrating because I listened to it and I'm like, if only they just got to the point. Like, there was even on the song Hell on Earth, the closer, there's a vocal bridge or harmony at the 7:30-minute mark that I'm like, oh my God, that sounds incredible. Why did I have to wait over 7 minutes to get to this point? Like, it just, if the band either took the time to actually be like, no, we don't need to repeat this solo or this riff 8 times. We can do it in 2 times and still be impactful. Or if they even just had a producer who maybe didn't just sit back. I mean, again, no offense to Kevin, but to me, they need someone who needs to kind of wake them up and to push them a little bit. They're almost, at certain points, this album sounds a little too comfortable for Iron Maiden. Not that the fire is gone. It's just that they're into their own comfort zone. And rather than pushing themselves to actually be thoughtful of what they're recording, they kind of just do what they like. I'm like, oh, that's good enough. Cool. Next song. Like, it's a little almost like too relaxing sounding for an Iron Maiden record, which is weird to say. And I think back to when we reviewed Between the Buried and Me's Colors 2. There were some very long songs and very complex and kind of all over the place. But that album, I still keep going back to that album because I'm still astonished at how every second of those songs served their purpose. And here I'm like, no, guys, you could have cut the fat here. If you had just spent an extra day or two listening through the songs, not even having to re-record anything, but just going, all right, we can cut this portion out, we can cut that portion. Like, there's just a lot of fat on this record. And that was the problem with Book of Souls. The difference, though, in my mind, is that there's some great shining moments. Even Stratego, I think there's some cool riffs there that I'm like, man, that's really cool. Again, if that was a 3-minute song instead of nearly 5 minutes, it would have been so much stronger. But then again, like you mentioned the song Time Machine, I agree. Really awesome song. And I think Death of the Celts, I got like a Dance of Death vibe from it with a little bit early Maiden, and I loved it. I mean, we actually talked about when we did a If You Have to Pick 3 episode on great albums but terrible covers. We talked about Dance of Death from Iron Maiden and how that is such an underrated record. And I go back to that record because it showcased them just trying to write stellar songs. Here, I feel like they were just kind of like being proggy for the sake of being proggy. I was, kept thinking like, man, this really is Maiden trying to be a little bit more on the proggy side, especially writing on the wall. And I don't think they've kept it a secret at all that they were very inspired by Jethro Tull on this record, or those kind of bands on this one, more so than in the past.
Honestly, in my opinion, I think that what was wrong with this is they could have dropped some tracks, and I honestly think that the short tracks are where Iron Maiden isn't the greatest on this album, and they kind of suffer from what Metallica had on Hardwired to Self-Destruct, where
I was thinking about that album too. Yeah.
You had some killer songs, and then the entire second disc of that album, you could have put that as a B-side and just called it a day, and Metallica would be, so much better off. But in here, I feel Iron Maiden, when they start to hit their stride later in the album, that this is the Iron Maiden that you know. This is the Iron Maiden you remember. This is not the Iron Maiden that showed up on Book of Souls. This is the Iron Maiden that you remember from Somewhere Lost in Time, or Rime of the Ancient Mariner, or songs like that, Blood Brothers. There's so many songs that I can pinpoint that they almost get to that level and say, nah, we're going to turn this in a direction that you're not really familiar with. So it's not really duplicating what they've done in the past, but it gives you those feels and those vibes. So you really have something that's unique to this record.
I think you also hit it on the head. For me personally, I struggled to get through the first 4 songs.
I struggled with the first one. I almost stopped and said, what are we listening to?
Yeah, the first one, there's an interesting riff there.
So
that one just
boring.
Literally halfway through, I'm like, are we still in this first track? Are we still in the title track? Come on.
It's really,
and Stratego
was the same riff the whole song.
Stratego got a little bit better, but I'm like, again, if they just, I'm looking at the track list, I'm like, I don't necessarily think there's any song I would cut out. I mean, other than Lost in a Lost World. I'm sorry, that one. Maybe if it was better production, I'd enjoy it more, but like something about that song was poorly done. I felt like Stratego and the Right on Wall, they've used keyboards a lot in the past few albums, but I felt like they had a synthesizer had a lot stronger presence on Stratego, and of course
on the whole album,
organ. Yeah, actually, you're right, more so than I expected. But yeah, those first songs, it was a struggle, and so by the time the Days of a Future Past came on, I'm like, all right, I actually really dig this. You hit it correct as well, that this definitely has its own unique flair that separates it from some of the other Maiden albums. There's definitely an element that is undeniably Maiden. Even though Writing on the Wall might be their tribute to late 70s, early 80s hard rock and prog rock, it's still undeniably Maiden. And it's not just because of Bruce's vocals either. I mean, the guitars, Nicko's drumming. I would be surprised if there's a lot of Maiden fans who absolutely hate this album. I can see maybe a fair amount also agreeing with me that like it drags a little too much in certain points. If they just took a scissor and just did a little cutting around and got to the meat, I think this could have been a lot more solid of an album. Like
I said, I dug it regardless. I feel like the more you get sometimes, the better it is on songs like The Time Machine and why am I blanking on the other one right now? Darkest Hour, like those types of long songs. Absolutely. Hell on Earth. What bothered me was I remember sitting listening, and I was trying to do some work as I'm listening to it, and I'm thinking, are we on the same song? I haven't heard Bruce yet. Is this really an 11-minute and 20-second instrumental?
And there's no reason it needed to be either. There's no reason. Literally, you could cut the first 2 minutes of that song because it's really just like a weird intro. and the last 2 minutes, which is just ambient sound. Like there's fluff for the sake of fluff, I feel like, on this album.
If they're trying to be artsy and they're trying to set a tone and a mood, and this was to close out that mood and that tone, I'm okay with it, but it doesn't need to be one big track. They could have taken the track and they could have done some weird like hell on earth, and then part 1 is the aftermath, part 2 is something else, and part 3 is leaving hell on earth or something, just different parts to the song, and you can get to those different parts, but you don't need to make it this track that I've got to search for Bruce's vocals on, smack in the middle of 11 minutes and 20 seconds.
I mentioned this in my review too. I think The Final Frontier is a very good Iron Maiden album. Came out in 2010, and I actually think the title track is one of the best modern songs that they have done. It's a little bit more rockish for Iron Maiden, but still really catchy. And it always bugged the hell out of me that they made it one long track with a 3-minute. It was a cool sounding intro to a record, but in order for me to get to the title track, I had to sit through a 3-minute like intro that when you finally listen to it, it just stops and then goes into the track. I'm like, this could have been 2 tracks. It didn't need to be 1. And I think this happened too often on this album. Lost in a Lost World is the top victim of that, for sure. I mean, literally 2 minutes in, I'm like, oh, now the song's starting? Are you kidding me? Come on. It's kind of like Lobster.
Okay.
Yeah. It takes
Iron Maiden being compared to a crustacean.
Hear me out. A lot of work goes into eating lobster sometimes, especially like if you're a lobster bake, a lot of crack and a lot of juices flying over, and you sometimes go, I got meat finally. I got the lobster meat, but was it worth all the mess? Was it worth all the work that went into eating a tiny piece of admittedly delicious lobster meat? But was it really worth all that mess and work? There's definitely moments on this album that once you get to certain points, and I mentioned this with a song like the Parchment, or no, I'm sorry, on Hell on Earth, where it's like, oh my God, that's so cool sounding. That's awesome. But why did I have to go through all that just to get to this? And then even some points was like, all right, this is a cool riff. Why am I hearing this over and over? Like it almost makes you not want to hear it anymore either, which is another flaw. So,
and I will not listen to the title track anymore just for that reason.
Well, does it really matter what our opinions are of this legendary band's new album? No. What really matters is the times, right?
All right. Well, let's get my time first since I went first. How'd I do?
Matthew, your times are the number 666.
Damn, I went way over.
I'm not going to lie. I kind of kicked myself that I didn't do a Number of the Beast reference like earlier. So I made up for it.
You've done it on so many other ones. It wouldn't have had the same impact.
I know. And yet here we are talking about Iron Maiden. But really, your time was 1 minute and 49 seconds.
Nice. That's how we do it. Trim the fat. Trim the fat.
Your cockiness makes me think that I had a lot of fat in my review, huh?
It's not as bloated as it usually is. Your time, 2 minutes, 21.
That's pretty bloated.
You've gone way over before. I was expecting 3 minutes, to be completely honest.
It would have been fitting for an album this long. Do you agree with our critiques of the legendary Iron Maiden's new album? But let us know what you think of Iron Maiden's new album. Whether you loved it, you hated it, you agreed with us, you disagree. Let us know on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, at Epic Footnote. Also subscribe to our YouTube channel to hear more podcasts like this, as well as some really cool videos where we show off our vinyl and do some other cool little content. And thank you to our sponsors. First, Rootless Coffee Co. Head over to rootlesscoffee.com. Again, use the code EPICROAST and you will receive 15% off of your order of coffee blends that really break free from boring, really creative, tastefully done crafts of roast. As you can tell, I really need coffee right now. I'm bolting with it. It's really great stuff. Again, rootlesscoffee.com. Use the code EPICROAST to get 15% off.
And then also don't forget about our other sponsor, Lucky 13 Beard Co. Lucky13beardco.com. Your small batch made beard balms and oils. Code you're going to use at checkout is EFP10. 10% off your entire order. If you've never tried beard balms and oils before, you're going to feel great, smell great, and you're going to get 10% off. EFP10 at checkout, Lucky13beardco.com. yearsl.com.
Thanks so much for listening, and hope you listen again real soon.
See ya.